Hello everyone. I've been watching Terry Crick's channel of late, and the videos he's been uploading on the subject of his Sudan figures, and it's just sort of touched a kind of chord with me, really, because I'm really interested in that period, but never got round to wargaming or painting up any figures for the Sudan, either the Gordon Relief expedition or the later 1898 Sudan campaign. But it's always interested me, and it made me think about this army that you see in front of you here that's been collecting dust in my cupboard for many years. I mean, I don't think I've added to it in easily 15 years, probably more like 20. And you'll see why in a moment as I go into it. But I thought it would make an interesting subject for a video, just to upload something and keep my my presence felt on the YouTube channel. So what I wanted to talk about really was kind of colonial wargaming in general, and why a lot of our wargaming projects stall and are never completed, and so on. So what this is an Italian army for the war of oh gosh, when was it? I think 1896. So it's right in the middle of that period of history that Terry's interested in, but and kind of in a very similar area of the world. It's in Ethiopia, which is to the south and southeast of the Sudan. And the Battle of Adowa was one of the few kind of famous victories of a sort of native power over a colonial power. And this is one of the things about wargaming colonial conflicts, really, that it's very difficult if you're going to represent the power of the kind of industrialized nations over the more kind of less advanced cultures that they subjugated. It's very hard to kind of to play a game which the colonized army has much chance of winning. So finding a set of war games rules is problematic if you're gonna play a large scale battle. I mean, it's fine if you're just playing a skirmish set of rules, but if you want to play it in a larger scale, it does become a little bit problematic. The usual way of solving the problem is to create another problem, which is to be compelled to paint up a massive colonial force, so that its sort of weight of numbers balances. And so I mean, this is the Italian side, but you can imagine, I never got round to really painting up any figures for the Ethiopians. I have got a massive, as is my habit, a massive lead mountain of unpainted figures for this period. Probably half as many again unpainted Italians, and about the same number as you see here of Ethiopians that I just gave up on this project. Really, I hope maybe one day I'll get back to it. So, in terms of wargaming rules, I based these figures up for a set of rules called Battles for Empire, and that set of rules I never actually got to play a game with them, obviously because I've only got the one side. But they struck me at the time as being a reasonable choice to go for. They're really designed for three separate conflicts, or there's sort of rules for three separate conflicts within the main rule book. That is the Anglo-Zulu War of 1879, the Sudan campaign of 1898, and the Boer War in 1901. So not for this period, but of the same era. So I didn't see any reason why they wouldn't be suitable for the first Italo-Ethiopian War. But then, of course, Black Powder was released, and a lot of people don't appreciate Black Powder for very good reasons. They don't find them realistic, but to my mind, Black Powder is ideal for colonial wargaming because it adds that kind of uncertainty and random nature of the rules, making improbable things kind of happen, and that does allow you to play a game where the sort of native armies have a much greater chance of competing against the colonial armies. So I like Black Powder in general, but I particularly think it's a good set of rules for colonial wargaming, and that's what I'm going to be using when I get to play a wargame with my now complete Zulu army and British army that I've got for the Anglo-Zulu Wars. So that is really my first point about why projects stall, because I absolutely hate rebasing, and I would have to take all these figures off their bases and rebase them, and I just can't bring myself to do it, especially as I haven't got the opposing army yet. So you know, that's one thing. It's one of the pitfalls that I came across. Many other pitfalls about building up an army, and I'll come to that in a moment. So what I'm going to do, rather than you looking from a distance at these, I'm going to sort of like bring the camera a little bit closer to the table. Haven't set the figures up in a particularly good way, so the focus might be a little bit of a problem to begin with, but I'll get you a little bit closer to some of the figures and then start to talk about some of the other issues I had. Okay, we'll start at this end of the table, and I'll adjust the position of the camera bit by bit as I go up the table. Right, so what you're looking at the moment are some lancers, Italian cavalry. Another problem that you often get when you're building any army is a lack of figure availability. Now, in the case of this particular war, figures can be a little bit hard to source. These figures here, and I've got to say at some stage that I was really dissatisfied with the way I painted a lot of these figures. They came out not to my satisfaction, and these lancers in particular, I'm a little bit unhappy with the painting, so kind of apologies for that, but it is going to be another one of my points about why I never got round to finishing this army. or finishing the project. These figures were from a company called Falcon. Now, that's not to be confused with the present day wargaming miniatures company called Falcon, who do a range of mainly 15mm. This company, Falcon, preceded them, and they were around in the 1990s, and had a range of figures for the Battle of Adowa and the first war between Italy and Ethiopia. But a very limited range, not many figures in it whatsoever. I particularly liked these cavalry. I think they're really interesting figures, which made it kind of more of a shame that I didn't do a better job of painting them. I won't go too much into the deficiencies of the painting, but it really kind of demoralised me, the way the army was turning out, and it was one of the reasons why I stopped. A particular disaster that happened, which some of you may remember if you've been wargaming painting figures long enough, was that I used to use Humbrol matte varnish, and I can't remember when it was mid-90s, was it? They, for some reason, they had an absolutely disastrous change of the formula, and when you varnish the figures, it didn't matter what the climatic conditions were, all the varnish would turn this sort of dusty white kind of colour. Absolutely terrible. There was a complete ruckus. I mean, I think at the time Humbrol nearly went out of business because of the scandal, and you can see that in particular on this individual figure here, and it was so disheartening, and I just couldn't bring myself to go over the figures again with a paint, and try and remove it. This particular figure I've got based individually because he's a sort of an odd figure. I was going to use him as a kind of messenger or token of some kind. But yeah, I think really nice figures, completely ruined by my painting and by the Humbrol varnish disaster. And I've never actually used Humbrol varnish since, even though that obviously they were compelled to correct it. I just will never trust Humbrol again. Behind them here, these figures are also by Falcon. No longer in business, obviously, because there's a new company not related to them at all called Falcon, as I say. And these figures, let's try and zoom in a little bit. The big criticism of these, obviously, is that it's a single pose. I don't think they had any other figures in their very limited range, so it's a single pose with a single kind of officer figure. So perfectly good figures, but an entire army of what a single pose is just ridiculous. So the Falcon range, although good, was inadequate for the purposes of building up an army. So that is one. That is one pitfall that you often come across. Doesn't matter what you're wargaming, you've really got to be assured of a good supply of figures for your game, and this is part of the reason why wars like this don't get wargamed. It's not that they wouldn't be popular. It's just the lack of figure availability. and it's a reason why sort of periods like the Napoleonic Wars or whatever are so popular, because there's a common, there's a commonality to all the ranges and so on, and people play it. It's a much bigger kind of community, which then makes lots of different ranges financially viable. Whereas companies like this start off and then don't finish. Having said that, though, these figures that you can see in front of you now are a company that came out, not sure when, Strategia Air Tactica is the name of the company. From my poor delivery of their name, you may guess that they're actually an Italian company. They've got a shop in Rome, but the figures are available on the internet. And being an Italian company, another reason why you might expect to find wargaming figures with an Italian kind of theme behind them. So a very extensive range of figures, and well worth looking at, but extremely expensive. I can't remember how much they were, but at the time I kind of did balk a little bit at the price. But this brings you into another thing. If you compare the figures, you can see they are very kind of different sizes. This is another one of my bugbears, really. That people say, well, humans are all different sizes, and that is true, but things like standard items of equipment like rifles and so on certainly aren't different sizes, it's not just the difference in the sculpts and that they obviously look alien to one another. It's the different sizes of weaponry and pieces of equipment and so on that gets to me. I know a lot of people put up with it, but that was another reason. You're going to see as I go along the army, I've sourced figures from a lot of different ranges out of desperation to complete the army. These figures and these models I particularly like, and the reason for that is that another one of my obsessions is that if I have an artillery piece, I do like to be able to represent it as being limbered or dismantled or whatever, so that I can represent the fact that it's moving on the tabletop. And so many different ranges don't go to that length. They just have the model of the artillery piece and no way of representing it as being limbered. Whereas here you've got these really lovely representations of mules with mountain guns that have been dismantled and put onto the mules for transport. I'm going to show you some different examples of that, or one different example of that, up the other end of the table in a moment. So had they been around at the start of this project, I probably would have painted exclusively Strategia Tactica figures and completed this army, and then completed an Ethiopian range using the same company. But I'd already kind of made a start and ended up with this kind of mix of figures that I wasn't particularly happy with, but delighted at the extent of the range from Strategia Tactica. Right, actually what I'll do now is just turn the camera off for a moment and then move it up the table a little bit. Okay, now these figures in the centre are mainly, but not entirely, from a different company, and that company I think was Bicorn. I'm not entirely sure of that, but I think it was a company called Bicorn. This figure here is another Strategia Tactica figure, sort of general. necessary for a wargaming army, and something that I don't think Bicorn did. So again, a welcome kind of find. And again, the Bicorn figures in particular, wasn't terribly happy with them. They're a little bit kind of grotesque, some of the sculpts. For instance, here's some ordinary infantry. You know, nice enough kind of poses. Let's try and get that. Yeah, it's not going to focus brilliantly, I'm afraid. But, you know, very kind of, almost kind of ogre-like faces. You can see on another one here, and these are scaries here. Don't know if you can make out, but that chap there has got the biggest nose. I mean, it's like Cyrano de Bergerac's nose. That figure in the middle, the officer, is a Strategio Tactica, but the other two, I think, are Bicorn. And you may recognise the officer in the middle there. Here's another Falcon miniature in between. So size-wise, they're kind of more or less the same proportions and sizes. So you can put those together on a similar base. But quite an extensive range, but not entirely complete. You know, which is why you couldn't. You couldn't make an army up entirely from Bicorn. I mean, in particular, things like the cannon didn't have any limbers like those, or mules like those figures I was just showing you. So they're okay. They're a little bit, especially the kneeling figures, are a little bit kind of squat or squashed. You know, so not entirely happy with them, but. They were okay. Right, let's move up the table a little bit more. Okay, now the figures at the front are Strategio Tactica, and again you can see some kind of additional kind of types of figure, because they have got a very extensive range. So this is an Ascari NCO mounted on a mule, is it, or a donkey? So a nice little command stand. This is an example of one of their mountain guns and cannon. You know, a nice sort of little group. But clearly, if I put that other one next to it, you can see there's a clear difference in sculpting style and proportions and so on. Just makes it to my mind, it makes it a little bit kind of, it jars a little bit to my eye. And this kind of thing, machine guns and so on. Strategio Tactica is the only company I know that does the appropriate kind of machine gun. So you have to go to them, but you're kind of compelled, you know, all the time to mix and match from different ranges. You know, or I was having not had this company available right from the start. So it kind of I did lose a lot of spirit. You know, as I progressed, I felt like I was working towards something that I was never going to be entirely happy with. The figures with the standards, let's try and move things forward a little bit, are these four bases are Strategio Tactica again, and it's more obvious with these than with the artillery, you know, how different they are in size and so on. the figure in the middle isn't Strategia Tactica, and you can see there's a kind of difference in proportions and so on. But if you look at those ones firing and compare it to, I don't know, compare it to these ones kneeling firing, you can see immediately how different they are. And then behind those, there's a mix here of bicorn and Strategia Tactica, but I just wasn't happy with the way these painted up. Lots and lots of Ascari, and I particularly don't like this pose. It just looks very kind of, you know, it's a sort of, it's a boring pose really, and too many of them doing exactly the same thing. Yeah, some of the officer figures, that's Strategia Tactica. Really like that. You know, I'm putting this army down, but having got it out and reviewed it again, I am beginning to feel that sense of kind of inspiration again. You know, maybe one day I'll add an Ethiopian army and get to play a game, but it's going to be an awful lot of work, partly to paint the army up and then to rebase the whole lot. Right, let's move things. Rather than keep moving the camera, I'm going to move things over. So here you've got another bicorn cannon, and here artillery piece rather, and here you've got the equivalent from Strategia Tactica. And as I say, I've got, you know, stands to represent it on the move. So really happy with the artillery. I mean, in terms of other periods, like my Crimean War project, you know, I still have that kind of irk that I'm never going to be able to show the figures limbered, because there isn't a compatible range with Eureka's 18mm, you know, that do limbers. Here, this is what my army started with. And you can see here that these figures really have a completely different look and feel to them. They're much chunkier, but not only that, there's some really kind of odd sort of poses and postures in there, and the people who know will recognise these immediately as being Old Glory. I mean, this kind of look, the sort of constantly glancing to the side, with a lot of their figures, is very kind of typical of Old Glory. But at the time I got these, there really wasn't a lot of figure availability for the Ethiopian War, and in fact these figures are really designed for the Boer War, not the Boer War, the Boxer Rebellion. Sorry, the Boxer Rebellion, which had a lot of foreign, you know, contingents battling out in China, and these are Bersaglieri, but it would have been exactly the same uniform for the Bersaglieri in Ethiopia a few years earlier, so thought I would make use of them. But again, it's just added to that problem of there being too many different styles and so on, and I particularly don't like these type of poses and so on, so I wasn't particularly happy with that. And finally, at the back here, again, mainly from Strategia Tactica, but some of these are bicorn. This one's Strategia Tactica. It's another model showing an artillery piece on the move. This one's being kind of prolonged or towed by the Ascaris rather than mounted on a mule, but it's a good way of showing an artillery piece being moved. And then lots and lots of different things that I was going to use as markers, which again is kind of important to me in wargaming, if you can do it, to find ammunition boxes and so on, or people carrying ammunition boxes, just to represent low ammunition or something like that. So these ones are Strategia Tactica, and these smaller ones are Bicorn. And I think they came with the artillery pieces, so you could put them around the artillery piece. But I tend to use them in war games, if you can get hold of them, to represent low ammunition or something like that. So anyway, that is kind of how not to go about assembling a wargaming army. Some of the pitfalls that you come across, some of the disasters in terms of painting them and so on. It's why I kind of lost the will to carry on with it. But as I say, really kind of inspired a little bit by Terry's videos to return to something like this, but I've just got so much else on the go at the moment. As you know, I've had a bit of a hiatus anyway with some issues that have been going on, and I've got back into painting figures by returning to Congo, which is a nice kind of light-hearted sort of game, and at the same time the figures are really, nice to paint and enjoyable to paint. So I'm kind of sort of building up my mojo again by concentrating on those at the moment. Anyway, I'll stop waffling. Thanks very much for watching, everyone, and see you on the next video. Bye for now.